We're not addicted to dopamine, you're not overstimulated, and you don't need any possible kind of dopamine detox you can think of. Why is it? The idea of dopamine detox sounds scientific, like your brain was literally just overstimulated by all possible hormones, but unfortunately we have to dismantle this myth. The term dopamine detox was popularized by Dr. Cameron Seppa, a clinical psychologist at the University of San Francisco. Ironically, even him said that the name is misleading because his original idea was rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy with helping people break compulsive habits by reducing impulsive behaviors, not by literally lowering dopamine levels. So the name is catchy, however, took on a life of its own. It eventually morphed into a pseudo-scientific self-help movement. We'll have to start from the dopamine itself. It's not really a pleasure chemical. It's a neurotransmitter, crucial for motivation, anticipation, and learning. Not really just for feeling good. As Robert Sapolsky, a leading neuroscientist, explained it, dopamine spikes not when you get a reward, but when you anticipate one. It's about wanting, not having. For example, in very common classical monkey experiments, the monkey usually awaits for the reward with the highest dopamine spike, but if you inhibit the dopamine levels by a syringe, for example, eventually the monkey doesn't even want to have a final reward. It just simply stands aside, and even if it's hungry, it doesn't crave food. You can eventually conclude that our brains are wired for pursuit, not just satisfaction. And if you could actually deplete your brain's dopamine, you would probably develop Parkinson's disease, not any kind of possible enlightenment you can think of. Just to mention, there was also a cool study with humans versus computers and another humans. We measure dopamine level, and actually we can conclude that dopamine is socially dependent, meaning that in studies with humans, it was eventually higher. But let's get something straight. When people are talking about dopamine addiction, they literally mean it? Quite obviously, if you look at how dopamine spikes differ under different circumstances, it's not as striking as it seems. So right here, 100 is a normal level. You see that social media barely touches 150 to 100, meth up to 1500, and cocaine 300, 400. Curiously, sex creates a dopamine spike of 200 to 150. It's even more than sugar, games, or even cannabis. Actually, it tells us something important, that our brain is wired for social connection and reproduction, not really apps and likes, but the problem isn't that social media spikes dopamine. The problem is that it tries to somehow mimic the real connection using much smaller hints this way. So as we previously considered how dopamine works, why you are really diving so deep into these shorts or reels is not because it actually makes you happy, but because you anticipate that the next reel or the next short will make you feel something better than this. And you can see that video games spike dopamine about as much as nicotine, but are everyone who games actually addicted? Same with sugar or even sex. It's not just a spike, it's how predictable, repetitive, and effortless the reward is that makes you potentially addictive. And this the same way, the same dopamine system that drives addiction also powers discipline and learning. Clearly, there are evidence that in drug use or other substance abuse, the dopamine system is impaired, and not in the way that the dopamine gets higher all over, but the receptors responsible for its binding just become less sensitive. Actually, it's not as such with the social media use, because basically, as you've seen, the urges aren't so high. But the reason you're feeling uncomfortable is that this pursuit of short-term happiness are quite compulsive. So the key difference is the drugs create unnatural surges, but natural behaviors create more regulated and useful ones. Though the social media are somewhere in the middle right now, because this 1 minute shorts and reels aren't as good as videos when you can really use your attention span. Though, so it's really more of an attention problem, but the term of easy dopamine isn't as true. It's just more of a ritualistic cycle when you are constantly anticipating a better reward from the next video, but there isn't as high spike of the dopamine as from other substances. So it's probably easier to recover from. And we finally have to understand that dopamine isn't just one thing, and it acts quite differently depending on the pathway it goes. So when you're anticipating a reward, it's it acts one way, in movement control different way, and in social interaction another way. And some people will just naturally have more active dopamine system, so they're just getting more happy from and activities you're getting bored from. Others don't. And that's why simple once-and-for-all fixes like detox are so appealing, but they're all also wrong, because people crave rituals and resets in a world that's constantly stimulating, but brain chemistry isn't a facet you can just turn off. Believing you can fix your brain by cutting dopamine is like trying to fix your car by draining all the oil, but the problem isn't not the chemical, it's how you are actually driving. Recent research shows dopamine doesn't just motivate, it also helps reshape memories of rewards. For example, if you take a mouse and it runs a threat associated with a bad outcome, dopamine actually helps it update memory so the threat is no longer so appealing. This flexibility is crucial for adapting to new experiences. A particular study in 2020 found that for people with the high level of dopamine in cingulate nucleus, squirrel's part of the brain, their dopamine system just switched upside down, and they were more prone to take a higher risk tasks and put much more effort, even with the long-term rewards. So it's just total different situation compared to the usual. And actually, even with the medications like Ritalin, you can probably enhance your own level of dopamine and reach the same result. But can we do it without any medications? But that's where the most curious part comes. You have to somehow fool your brain. You've probably heard 1,000 times about this Pomodoro techniques and all this shit, but what actually works is just putting a timer on for say 5 minutes when you actually have to work for a whole hour. And then you would really feel that after those 5 minutes you are actually ready to go further, maybe another 5 minutes. And then after the 10 minutes some magic happens. You are actually finally ready to work. So have unexpectedly wouldn't it sound, but the main part is simply to start. And about other techniques like journaling and scheduling your rest to keep your brain less reactive. Also, maybe reschedule your phone, hide instant apps, and make this distraction effortful. So turn off this push notifications would serve you good if you just start to ruin your habits, but for long term, it's just a bit too exhausting because basically your brain needs some simple stimuli to enjoy. But if you can keep up with this, why not? You can schedule some screen-free hours per day and just start enjoying some other pleasures like reading or talking with your friends, just going out. You should probably keep your phone out of your nightstand, because if you start in your morning with it and going to bed with it, it can be quite challenging for you to learn those new habits. And finally, one more thing. Just don't fall into all for nothing thinking. You don't need to delete every app, move to the woods, or just live in silence. Just like your brain adapts to chaos, you can adapt to some proper structure if the structure gives you the right patterns. Digital tools aren't as simple as they're depicted, and dopamine isn't bad. The truth is always in the middle. The moderation and awareness beat all the extremes every time. So your real goal isn't to eliminate the stimulation, but it's just to make sure you're choosing it yourself and not being run by it. Personally, I think that the dopamine detox trend actually reflects a much deeper anxiety about overstimulation in the digital age. We always crave for endless novelty and sometimes feel burned down and focused and desperate for quick fixes. And social media influencers very often doesn't have any scientific background, and they simply amplify the fears and offer this dopamine detox as a silver bullet. But what actually does it promise to you? It has to reset your brain's reward system somehow, make life simpler and pleasures enjoyable again. Probably cure digital addiction and procrastination. But what science says is that there is absolutely no evidence that abstaining from pleasurable activities would reset dopamine levels of receptor sensitivity in any meaningful way. Dopamine isn't even addictive in itself, it's simply a messenger for motivation and learning. So behavioral breaks like digital detoxes can help with focus and self-control with changing your habits, but not because of a dopamine reset. These benefits came from just, as I said, simply resetting your habits, and there aren't any real neurochemical changes you can predict. Extreme forms of dopamine fasting, like total isolation or severe restriction, can harm mental and physical health and cause loneliness, anxiety, and even malnutrition. So if you misunderstand the science, it usually can lead people to avoid healthy pleasures or seek extreme solutions instead of addressing real issues like anxiety or compulsive behavior with some evidence-based therapy. Like, say, mindfulness. Those people just sometimes heard from influencers and they can't help. Really, what's evident there is probably that almost all clinical studies show that cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness can actually help to break compulsive habits, but these effects are unrelated to dopamine levels directly. So, are we really chasing something or just chasing the chase? What's the cure? How we can help ourselves? Actually, one YouTuber tried 7 days detox challenge, and what he found was that he actually reported a much higher mindfulness.
There were no measurable changes in the scans, but he just limited his distractions, and probably that was the case.
Even studies on walking and running show that 30-40 minute run or 20-30 minute walk can qualitatively improve your happiness level and mood. So basically, all the studies done on the topic show that what actually works is just a habit change, not dopamine level. Probably the good part is that the dopamine detox trend is constantly evolving, and some experts claim that digital hygiene are already at the doorstep, and maybe it could come up to some mindful technology use rather than extreme data ignorance. So future research will probably likely focus on how to balance technology and well-being, and hopefully won't result in pseudoscience. You don't really need a detox. You need to understand how your brain works and how to partner with it. Dopamine isn't your enemy, it's simply a sign that there's something to move forward to. The real challenge isn't to get this lower level, it's just to feel better. So, must say, if you made it this far, your dopamine system probably works just well. Share your thoughts, subscribe, and see you soon.